Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Overcoming Chronic Illness podcast. My name is Dr. Bryan Rade, and I am a naturopathic doctor. And today I am not joined by a guest. Today I'm doing the podcast episode myself. I have some, I think, interesting subject matter to discuss, and so I'm excited to share that information with you today. Just before I get into the nuts and bolts of the podcast, I just wanted to quickly invite you to sign up for my newsletter, my mailing list, if you haven't done so already. By joining my mailing list, you can stay abreast of the things that I'm excited about in practice, and also get regular updates about videos that I'm posting on social media, if I'm hosting live Q&A sessions, and just giving my mailing list members opportunities to give me input on subject matter they're interested in for future podcast episodes, things like that. And then also by signing up for my newsletter, you also get complimentary access to the first two modules rather of my Overcoming Chronic Illness course. Just briefly, the course is an overview that gets into a fair bit of depth with all of the major topics that are oftentimes crucial to know about to unravel these incredibly complex cases of chronic illness that I deal with in practice. And I know many folks listening are likely suffering from, whether it's something with a label like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome, or it's more of I don't have a label, but I have all these chronic crazy symptoms and I want to get rid of them. And so the Overcoming Chronic Illness course talks about many of the majority of all of the major underlying factors and causes and possible treatment considerations and whatnot for dealing with basically making heads or tails, kind of navigating through that complex chronic illness. So the course is designed, whether person listening or the caregiver of, or the loved one of someone who's dealing with complex chronic illness wants to have a better understanding of what complex chronic illness is driven by, and again, some treatment options, testing options, things like that, to learn more about it. Or it can also be useful for folks who are working with a clinician who maybe is specializing in one or two areas that are relevant to their case, but there's more than those one or two things going on, and they can pass the resources from this course onto that clinician that they're working with to help expand their knowledge and maybe start tapping into other, exploring other areas that might be holding the case back. So for example, if say a patient's working with a clinician who knows a lot about SIBO and a lot about chronic Lyme disease, let's say, but the clinician doesn't really know a whole lot about mold illness, or doesn't know a whole lot about heavy metal related issues, or doesn't know a whole lot about mast cell activation syndrome or other histamine issues. Well, there are modules on all those things with resource sheets can be passed on to the clinician, or they can access the modules themselves or whatnot. So anyways, if that is something that is of interest to you, or you know someone who might be interested in that, please consider signing up for the mailing list, or passing that information on to someone who might be interested in accessing that information. And I'd be most pleased if more folks can benefit from accessing that course. So the sign-up link for the newsletter is in the show notes for this podcast episode, or if you're watching this on YouTube, then the link is in the description below. So with all of that out of the way, today I want to talk to you about what I call my healthy lifestyle habits, or my healthy habits tip sheet. I have this put together in a handout that I pass on to my patients at certain points in time when I want to relay to them some of the day-to-day lifestyle things that they can work with to help complement the other treatment facets of treatment that we're working with. So the time I might bring this up would be when we have the mold illness protocol in place, or we have the chronic infection protocol in place, or we have the mitochondrial support protocol in place. We have these things in place, and we're waiting for them to do all the work that we want them to do. It can, of course, take several weeks, sometimes several months, sometimes a year or two, or sometimes more, to completely navigate our way through the complex chronic illness quagmire that is the case for some folks. And as such, once we have these pieces of the puzzle in place, there are certain day-to-day or week-to-week lifestyle things, etc., that can be implemented that can be, I think, really helpful to speed things along, that I've seen act in a helpful way with many of my patients. And the other time that I bust out the healthy lifestyle tidbits handout is when patients are feeling a lot better. They've got through the lion's share, if not all, of the chronic illness issues that they've been having, and now they're going to go forward and prosper. They are going to, live their life to the fullest, and many of them want to be as healthy as possible because they know how terrible it is being sick, and they don't want to get back there again. And of course, there are no guarantees in life, but some of these tidbits can be quite, in my opinion, helpful and important to keep us as healthy as possible and hopefully ward off future illness issues. So as per usual, nothing that I'm saying should be construed as medical advice. This is for informational purposes only. And if you need medical advice, please talk to your healthcare provider to get that advice. With this handout, I am going to screen share in just a minute. And this is the handout that I pass on to my patients. So it does talk about some frequencies of treatment and durations of treatment and things like that. So there are actually tangible recommendations within this handout. I do want to make it abundantly clear that I'm not passing this on as advice. It's really, again, more just for informational purposes, and the specifics around this I would always tailor to my I would always tailor the advice for my patients. So if these are things that you're looking at and you're thinking, oh, I think I would like to incorporate that into my life, please do talk to your healthcare provider about making these modifications. In any event, please do not take this as any type of medical advice, because I'm not giving you medical advice through this podcast. So just going to quickly share my screen. All right. Yes. More awkward drinking fluid during the podcast when I'm not actually interviewing somebody, where there's those natural pauses. So anyone just listening, just need a little hydration break there. Okay, so without further ado, healthy daily habits to consider. Now, if you are listening to this and not watching it on YouTube, if you go to my YouTube channel, which is Halifax Naturopathic Doctor, then you can see the screenshots or the video recording of the handout. And I'm not going to post the PDF or a link to the PDF in the show notes, but you can see this if you decide to go to the YouTube video, and I'll read through the different bits of health advice so you can listen to it. But if you want to actually see it, please visit the YouTube channel. So number one is focus on your breath. These are not in any particular orders of importance per se. And quite frankly, when I'm going through this with my patients, I'll kind of tailor it, tailor it to say, well, these are the things that might be the most helpful for you, or maybe they're already doing things that I feel are maybe going to bring them similar benefits to what are mentioned here in the handout. So, may or may not be applicable to everyone. But anyways, again, not in any particular order of importance. But the first one is focus on your breath. So this is a really simple breathing exercise. It invokes something called the relaxation response. We've all heard or maybe otherwise know that things like deep breathing and meditation and whatnot are associated with a lot of different health benefits. We know that when folks are in more of a parasympathetic state, so kind of more of a rest and relaxation state, then it is quite tonifying for our mitochondria. It's just helps to counterbalance the rat race, the hamster on a wheel kind of society that many of us find ourselves in. Hopefully those of you listening maybe are not in that kind of scenario, but I know a lot of you probably are, because I know I certainly am, and many folks seem to be. So doing things to help support our parasympathetic nervous system can be really helpful. So this relaxation response, I really love this because it's such an easy thing for folks to do, and it doesn't require any in-depth training. It doesn't require doing yoga classes. Nothing against yoga, but just it's very, very simple. And so the way it works is, if I was going to do this or recommend it to my patients, as it says here in the notes, just basically breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth slowly and methodically, at least 5 times, focusing on the breath while doing so. And basically what this does is by doing this, it forces a person to focus on just one thing, as opposed to focusing on the myriad things that are oftentimes flying at us throughout the course of a given day. Now, as it also says here, ideally, one would do this, say, 2 to 10 minutes per day, just to make more of a practice out of it. But even doing it, say, 5 times would be better, in my opinion, than doing it 0 times. As it says here on the handout, the pro tip is multitask and do this. One can do this when they first wake up or while they're falling asleep at night. For me, super busy, very, very busy practice. I have 3 kids, have, extracurricular activities that I enjoy doing, lots of side projects, including hosting a podcast. And I don't set aside time in my waking hours to do this, but when I'm falling asleep at night, or if my kids wake me up in the night or something and I'm working to fall back asleep, that's when I'll do this. So I kind of multitask with that. Ideally, I'd set aside 5 minutes a day or 15 minutes a day to do some deep breathing. At some point when my kids are bigger, I may find time to do that, but it is something that one can just multitask with. And a lot of these things that I'm going to mention coming up here, the 10 healthy lifestyle habits, this is number 1 of 10, many of them can be multitasked. Okay, so number 2 is go outside. I interviewed Carrie Bennett, her handle being Carrie B Wellness. If you haven't checked out that previous podcast episode, it was maybe 2 or 3 podcast episodes ago. It's really worth a listen. I'm checking her out on social media. She's primarily on Instagram, but her information is fantastic. And she talks a lot about why it's so important to get sunlight exposure. I believe she also talks about the importance of getting infrared exposure, which we get through sunlight. So not only for vitamin D benefits, but also getting the infrared exposure as well. And so it's pretty simple, trying to spend at least 5 minutes outside, not on an electronic device, ideally, preferably in sunlight to get benefits of the various sun's rays. And ideally, as it says here in italics, doing this for 15 to 45 minutes daily would be ideal. And bonus points if you can be near trees or the ocean or both. A nice oceanside forest, which here in beautiful Nova Scotia, where I live, we do have those opportunities. I'm sure they're available elsewhere too. I just haven't spent a lot of time on other coasts, but we know that there are benefits to being close to the ocean, being in the forest. There are probably many benefits to it, but as far as modern day science has identified, to my understanding, some of the electromagnetic frequencies, like the beneficial EMFs that come from those naturally occurring phenomena, are really good for us. To my understanding, there's also lots of electrons that float around in the forest just due to the nature of all the vegetation and whatnot, and that's something that, to my understanding, is quite beneficial for our health too. So if we can be in the around trees, be near the ocean, that's great. But if you're living in a the urban jungle, you're in the middle of downtown Manhattan or something like that, even just being outside, getting that sunlight, getting the freshest air possible, probably fresher than inside of a building, I think is something that can be really beneficial for a number of reasons. Number 3 is move your joints. So there's this wonderful system out there. It's called functional range conditioning, or FRC for short. My wife turned me onto this some years ago, and it's just awesome. It's a pretty large system of movement and analyzing and optimizing human biomechanics. But there's an element of this called CARS, which is an acronym for controlled articular rotations. If you go on YouTube or some other social media platform, or through the website of the FRC folks, functional range conditioning folks, they you can see videos of folks doing CARS. There's some local clinicians here in my neck of the woods that I sometimes refer patients to get trained in doing this, or there are online courses that are available through the FRC website, or again, some folks just learn through watching the YouTube videos. But essentially, it involves moving every major joint in the body through its full range of motion at least one time, in both directions, at least once a day. Ideally, doing 3 to 5 repetitions in each direction is ideal. As it says here, bonus points if you do it slowly and with control. Not really the best just video setup here to kind of demonstrate this, but well, maybe I'll try here, because I guess I am on a corded microphone, so it can still hear me and see me on the video. So for example, if I was going to do controlled articular rotation of my shoulder joint, then basically I'm doing essentially just a big windmill with my arm. There's kind of a little wrist turn at the top just to get the right kind of angulation or mobility, if you will, at that glenohumeral joint in my shoulder. And so basically just doing this big windmill windmill motion. And so that would be a controlled articular rotation of my shoulder joint. Where I say bonus points for doing it slowly and with control, what that refers to is that if I go at a very, very slow pace, so I kind of tense up all the muscles, around my shoulder joint, so I have those muscles tense. And actually, ideally, with controlled articular rotations, we keep tension through our entire body while moving any one given joint. So if I'm really tensing all my muscles, especially around my shoulder joint, and I bring that up nice and slowly with really good control, as I'm doing this, I can feel those muscles engaging. And if I were to do 3 to 5 rotations or repetitions of this, by the end of it, I'd feel a little bit tired in those shoulder, like in my shoulder muscles. And the reason being is that I'm engaging all of these stabilizing muscles that I don't normally engage in my day-to-day life. And so the idea is that by putting joints in the body through the full range of motion, and we do this for shoulders, our cervical spine, our thoracic spine, our lumbar spine, our hip joints, our knee joints, our ankle joints, our elbow joints, our wrist joints. You can do it for your TMJs, like temporomandibular joints. You can do this with all the scapular joints as well. We can do this with all the major joints in the body, and the benefits of this are manyfold. One of which is that it brings more blood flow to the area, which can help with tissue healing, keeping the tissues as happy and healthy as possible there. It also engages the nervous system in the area, which is also good for just healthy tissue maintenance. And then also, I think another big benefit is that when we actually put our joints through their full range of motion, then our bodies are used to keeping those joints in the full range of motion. Things don't seize up as much, tighten up as much. We're going to be less prone to having tight muscles and subsequent aches and pains and potential, deterioration of those joints in question. Also, life is full of surprises, and sometimes, at least in most parts of Canada, at certain times of the year, and of course in other places too, there's ice on the ground, and we might slip and fall, or you're out there shoveling snow and you're in a big rush, and or you're digging a hole or helping somebody with renovations on the weekend or something. You're plugging away with a hammer, and you're doing that for a couple hours, and you haven't done it in years, and like there could be repetitive strain things or injury things that might happen. And if our joints are not used to moving in certain motions, we're going to be much more likely to tweak a rotator cuff tendon, or maybe sprain an ankle or break a hip or what have you. So kind of moving those joints through their full range of motion, and ideally doing it in a way that is akin to the FRC methodology, I believe can be really helpful. Speaking from firsthand experience, I generally multitask with this when I'm playing with my kids. If they're running around and not using me as a human jungle gym, or engaging me in their endless make-believe games, which are lovely. I'll try to sneak in some FRC, or during my residency meetings when my resident's talking to me about her cases, like I'll sneak in some of this as well. So trying to multitask when we're already busy with things. But even, 1 repetition per joint per day could be, in my opinion, would be a heck of a lot better than not doing it at all. So kind of dovetailing on point number 3, number 4 is just move your body. That adage of if you don't use it, you lose it, in my opinion, is very true. And ideally, as it says here, within one's ability level, exercising for 1 to 5 minutes, 3 to 5 times a week is great. Now, as it says in italics, ideally doing, say, 30 to 45 minutes, 3 to 7 times a week would be ideal. Now, when it comes to talking to folks about dealing with complex chronic illness and these types of recommendations, of course, I'm going to tailor that to what's going on with them. But even if it was a matter of, okay, like, please, get up off the couch. You have to lie down most of the time. You have terrible dysautonomia. You have postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or you're just so tired that if you overexert yourself even a little bit, you just feel awful for hours or days afterwards. It may be something as simple as just do like a little bit of joint mobility, some wrist circles while you're lying on the couch, or try to like at least sit up every couple of hours and, maybe move your neck and shoulders around a little bit. It could be something that minor, shall we say, but of course, hopefully a lot of folks aren't quite that depleted and debilitated, and they could do more than that. But finding the amount of physical activity that's tolerated and within reason to work with, I think is very important. So when I pass this handed on to my patients, as it says there at the bottom of this section, please talk to me about specifics, because this is something that's more nuanced than some of the other ones. Number 5 is express gratitude. It was, let me see here, I think shoot, I'm losing track of my podcast interviews. Anyways, it might have been, shoot, now I can't remember. I think Dr. Stacy Baker talked about this. Also, Dr. Nicole, who I'm blanking on her last name right now because her handle on Instagram, I think, is just Dr. Nicole ND. She's a naturopathic doctor as well. I believe the two of us, or the three of us, spoke about that in our respective interviews. And maybe another, actually, I believe Dr. Jason West, who was my most recent interview, I believe we also talked about this to some extent. There's this it's a little cliche expression, but like having an attitude of gratitude, I think, is really important. It's something that I strive to do in my life. I do it, I mean, on a daily basis, and strive to express gratitude as much as possible. Of course, being polite and saying thank you for things, and telling, showing appreciation to my wife and family members and patients and friends and all of that, and expressing that, super important, of course, to be doing those things on a regular basis. But even just like as a self, introspective practice, trying to feel truly grateful for at least 5 things in your life once a day, I think is a good practice to get into the habit of. And I realize that this is, for some folks, maybe for many folks, could be a little bit of a triggering topic, because some folks are just really devastated with the impact that chronic illness has had on their lives. And so I understand that it might be more difficult for some than others, but even something very simple as I'm thankful that I have this place to live, or maybe I've had some patients where they don't have a home, they have to couch surf and stay with friends and whatnot because they can't afford to, they're not able to hold a job, and it's not because they're too sick. But even I'm thankful that I have, a place to rest my head at night, that's not out in the elements. I'm thankful that there are good, caring people in the world. Like it could be, there should always be at least a few things that we can think of that we can be thankful for, even if our lives are very, very, very hard. And again, it's a spectrum. So I know the majority of folks listening don't have it quite that challenging, but like as challenging as like struggling to find 5 things to be grateful for. But I think having having that sort of practice of expressing gratitude, I believe, can be really, really helpful. So I think it's an important thing to consider working with. And another pro tip: so multitask when you first wake up or falling asleep. So my own life, as I when the lights finally go off, lying in bed, I tend to pass out pretty quick because probably a little bit underslept than I should be, because things are very busy, too many things to do, not enough hours in the day. But as soon as the lights off, like I just run through my list of things that I'm thankful for, and it's just a nice kind of meditative type of practice, and if I'm not asleep by the time before I get to the end of my list, then maybe I'll do my deep breathing and my focusing on my breathing, and kind of go from there. So it's something that one can do when they're multitasking. I do it while I'm driving as well, of course, paying attention to the road, but expressing gratitude as well is ways to multitask that. Number 6, again, can be a little bit triggering sometimes, because sometimes, for many folks, it's hard to just be able to do enough things for oneself to take care of yourself, activities of daily living, or, if you're able to work, but it's, really a struggle. I know that it's easier said than done for some folks, depending on their situation. But, whether it's, as it says here, something that's small, something medium, or something big, helping others makes the world a better place, and it'll make you feel good too. But it might be something it could be something, very small, very minor, in the grand scheme of things. It doesn't have to be huge, outlandish gestures or things like that, or working at a food bank 8 hours a week or something like that. It could be something relatively small. So just a few examples I have listed here. So depending on your skill set, you could make something for someone. You could promote a local business on social media. So say, oh man, I really love my local butcher, or my local artisan, or whatever. It's just just put out a little bonus post, link to their website and say, hey everybody, I just want you to know I really love these folks, or write favorable reviews on their social media accounts or whatnot, which hopefully it would be feasible. It doesn't cost anything to take some time, not a whole ton of energy, hopefully. I mean, of course, there's folks who are electromagnetically sensitive out there. And so maybe that's easier said than done for them, but most of us hopefully could say do something like that. If you have the energy and wherewithal and whatnot, volunteering an hour of your time, like say 1 hour per week or even 1 hour per month, which might be something that could be done online, like saying, hey, can I help out? I can't, get out of the house easily, or like I only have, I've got some health issues. I can't actually come into the food bank or the charity thrift store or the whatever it happened, or the animal rescue or whatever it is, but I'd like to donate some time. Like, can I do some research for you? Can I help with some networking? Can I do whatever it happens to be, and maybe see if there's some way to help if that's feasible. Another example here, calling a lonely family member or someone in your community and spending time with them or whatnot. So again, even just something small, it does help to make the world a better place, and as it says here, like, can make you feel good too. And I know from talking to many patients with complex chronic illness over the course of time, a lot of folks feel like they're there's sort of this element of like, oh, like it's really frustrating and saddening because I feel like I'm not really contributing a whole lot, like I'm not able to work, or I'm not able to do all the things that I love and whatnot. But by doing things like this, like it is something that can give more of a sense of accomplishment and kind of helping with, again, just helping to make the world a better place. So just something to consider. All right, number 7. So this one is one that I think I think they're all important, but this is another one that's kind of a mindset switch sometimes, or in a sense, but I think it's something that can be quite helpful. So this one is entitled "Choose to be healthy, don't be forced to be healthy." So when you choose to do something, it is empowering, whereas being forced to do something oftentimes will breed resentment and potential failure. So let's look at a couple of examples to see what the heck I'm talking about. So one example would be, I'm choosing, say we're at a social event or something, and to say I'm choosing not to eat the chocolate cake because I prefer to feel good versus I can't eat the chocolate cake because it goes against my diet. So this is one that, I've had a modified diet for many years, probably 25 years-ish or so now, which is it's evolved over time. But once upon a time, it was, oh man, like I'm just, go to say my family function, my wife's family, lots of delicious food, lots of desserts, things like that. And it'd be like, oh, it's dessert time. It's like, oh yeah, like I can't eat that. And like, it just kind of creates, I'd feel a bit deprived, and be kind of like, oh, like there's Bryan with his weird diet or whatnot, and he's never eating the junk food and this and that. But some years ago, I kind of changed my language around it, kind of changed my mindset around it. It's like, oh, like I'm just not eating that because like I'm just not in the mood for it, or I just don't want to eat that, and because I know that I'm going to feel better if I don't indulge in that. Now, I'm certainly not saying that I'm certainly not insinuating that it's not okay to like let your hair down, have some dessert here and there. But if it comes down to like, oh man, like I know if I eat that, like I am going to have that skin breakout, or my gut's going to get all cranky, or I'm going to have diarrhea for the next 2 days or something, kind of making that choice of like, oh, I want to choose to feel healthy, as opposed to, oh, I can't eat that because I'm not allowed to. It's nice to have that empowering feeling, and it also can kind of change the energy or the vibe around what you're saying to the folks that you might be, like if it's a social event or whatnot, or just with eating with family, even in one's own household, be like, oh, like I'm just choosing not to do that because I just don't want to. I'd rather not eat it because I don't want to, or I'm choosing not to for this or that reason, not because I can't do it or I'm not allowed to do it. All right, just a few more here. So number 8 is challenge yourself. So exiting, so I'll just read what it says here. So exiting your comfort zone leads to more resilience, enhanced brain function, and personal growth. That's physically, mentally, and or emotionally. Plus, we get a nice boost of feel-good neurotransmitters, notably dopamine. So, for example, if we do cold exposure therapy to enhance your, you could do cold exposure therapy. Sorry. The example here is for my patients, like, oh, talk to me if you're interested in this. We could do some cold exposure therapy to enhance your mitochondrial function. So, cold exposure therapy is probably a classic example of getting out of your comfort zone because it's distinctly uncomfortable to be exposed, to excessive amounts of cold. But we know from research literature, it's really good for us. It helps to reduce inflammation levels. It's good for our mitochondrial function. It helps us stimulate new mitochondrial function. It's good for our metabolism and tissue healing and this and that. Helps to raise dopamine levels if done at certain temperatures and whatnot. And so that would be an example of like, oh, I'm going to challenge my body with this or that. Now, cold exposure therapy isn't necessarily appropriate for everyone at every stage of their health journey, but just as an example of kind of a physical challenge that can be lead to benefit. Another example would be taking a class in something that sounds challenging, whether it's learning a language or I don't know, doing something. I took up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu a little over a year ago, and that is very challenging in many ways, but it's been, really great addition to my life. So, so taking a class or something to that effect. Another example would be stopping screen time 15 minutes earlier, even though you don't want to. And this, as I say here, perhaps to do some of the healthy habits, on this list. So I'm going to stop my screen time 15 minutes earlier because I want to do my deep breathing, or I'm going to do some movement, or I'm going to call up my lonely uncle or something like that to, kind of doing a good deed in that way. So, we've all been there. I'm sure, or the majority of us have been there, scrolling through social media or watching that, next episode on Netflix or something like that. And it's like, I just, it'd be so nice to just like keep watching that. It's like, no, I'm going to stop. I'm just going to actually like kind of go outside of my comfort zone. I'm going to I'm just going to turn the phone off and do something else, or I'm going to not watch that next episode and I'm going to go do this thing. And by doing that, it gives this, feeling of empowerment. You get that nice little dopamine hit and maybe can go off and do something that's arguably more productive or more beneficial than, looking at that next meme with cats or babies or whatever it happens to be. Number 9 is avoiding chemicals. Chemicals are bad for you and the people around you. And some of the examples would include scented products. Now, things that are scented with essential oils, to my understanding, are okay, but artificially scented products, like as listed here, cologne, perfume, scented deodorant, room fresheners, dryer sheets, laundry detergents, hand soaps, shampoo, baby soap. They're all just those artificial scents. They are chemicals. They are bad for us, and they're also bad for the people around us. I feel like I'm going to step up a little bit of a soapbox here. It's just, I've seen the really sometimes devastating effects that chemicals can have on folks with multiple chemical sensitivities or other, persisting health issues. And it's just, I really wish one of my hopes for the world to be just to have like a global awareness that like, oh, when I put on that cologne, it's toxic for me putting it on. And it also might be really, it's toxic for the people around me. And it might be really, really bad for the other people who are in the movie theater with me or the restaurant with me or whatnot. I mean, nothing against the good folks in the perfume and cologne industry and whatnot, but like, it is just really bad for us. And I really wish that those things would just go away because they'd be better for society as a whole. In my opinion, our health as a whole, it's enough chemicals as it is. We don't need these as well. And that's true of all these other different products as well. So I know many of the folks listening are probably have already drank the Kool-Aid about like, yeah, I'm going to stay away from chemicals because I know they're bad for me. But in case that's something that hasn't crossed your, been brought to your attention yet, it's a good idea, in my opinion, to avoid those artificially scented products. The same would be true of cleaning products. Trying to stick with things that are naturally derived. So again, for folks just listening, I'll just read here. So strive to purchase cleaning products from a supplement store or the health food section of your grocery store, or use just natural cleaners like vinegar and water and things like that, as appropriate. Of course, always double check to make sure it's not going to ruin your antique china cabinet or whatever it happens to be. But trying to use non-chemical cleaners would be a better choice. And then trying to avoid pesticides. So as it says here, whoops-a-daisy on the handout, local and organic is best, but it's not always an option. There's a group called the Environmental Working Group. They have something called the Dirty Dozen list, which is every year they publish this, and it's the 12 most heavily sprayed or most heavily pesticide laden types of produce that are out there. So at the very least, trying to avoid those or getting spray-free alternatives. And there's a link to the Dirty Dozen there, but it's just the Environmental Working Group website is ewg.org. And then in terms of cookware, as it says here, avoid heating food in plastic, avoid nonstick pans. So cast iron or stainless steel are ideal because of the chemicals in there as well. And so the very last item here, and not to say that this is an exhaustive list, but 10's a pretty good number. It's a nice round number. The last one is eat healthy food when you're hungry. And so as I say here, hopefully we've discussed this in office already. Again, this is directed at my patients, but if we haven't had time yet, please ask me. So at the end of the day, there are always going to be exceptions when it comes to diet, and I certainly don't make sweeping recommendations across the board, but as a general rule, unless a patient has a history of an eating disorder or some other thing that might be going on, some other kind of complicating diagnosis, generally speaking, if we eat healthy food when we're hungry, then that tends to lead to healthier body composition, better energy levels. If we're eating when we're not hungry, it's kind of giving your body a present that you didn't want. It's like, oh, somebody gave me this really ugly sweater, and now like you've given me a chore to do to go to the mall to return that, so it's kind of like, oh, thanks for the gift, but it's like, do I want to drive all the way across town? And not to be ungrateful for ugly sweaters or anything like that, but just the gist of it is, if you're eating when you're not hungry, your body's like, oh, like, why did you give me this thing? Because it takes energy, it takes resources for the body to process food. And so if we eat when we're not hungry, when we just eat when the clock tells us to, then that can sometimes lead to problems with blood sugar regulation, body mass composition, sometimes digestive issues. And anyways, it can be an important thing to consider. For a lot of folks, I find that the